Well, I hope this study has been a help and an encouragement. I've said this a time or two that the reason that I was doing this is I taught this in our school, and about 3 or 4 lessons in. Now let me clarify this. I am a Baptist with a capital B. Okay, there is no waver in that. But as I studied some of the history, it just made me so much more passionate about just standing and not really caring what anybody else thinks. And I was already that way, but it just kind of ignited just a little bit more in me. And I hope that this has the same effect on everyone else. And as I studied that, I thought, you know what, our church needs to hear all of this as well. And so here we are looking at it. We're going to today kind of set the stage for a miracle. Next week, I really encourage you to be here next week. Next week, we're going to go all the way up to the Bill of Rights. And if we have time next week, I want to tell you a story that will be encouraging to you and I think an inspiration for what we are supposed to do in America if we have time next week. But really, we need to get to the Bill of Rights. And that's really kind of where we are heading today. And you'll see that, I think, as we go through this. You remember last week that I mentioned the Warren Baptist Association. The Warren Baptist Association had a meeting September 11th of 1770. Remember, this is the group that started asking for letters to be sent, mainly to Isaac Backus, to be sent on what they were dealing with, the persecution, the government stealing their liberty and forcing them to worship in a way that was not right according to them, which of course was all about the abuse that they were dealing with. This association, the Warren Baptist, they agreed that there could be no relief found from Massachusetts concerning the ministerial taxes that we keep talking about this, and so they would have to appeal to the king, and we'll mention that here in just a little bit. When these, remember the exceptions, we dealt with those quite a bit last week, and they kept expiring. The politicians in Boston asked them to draw up, because they were raising such a ruckus, asked them to draw up their own exception for them to bring to them. And they wanted it signed by the pastors in Boston and in Haverhill. Now, that's kind of interesting. Now, why in the world would they want that? Why does that even matter? You've heard the story, no doubt, about John Hancock signing the Declaration of Independence. He was not bashful in his signature. He was very adamant, and it was large. That's why we call a signature a John Hancock still today. But he wanted it to be known. My name is attached to this. Well, that was their thinking in what they were doing. They wanted names attached. Why would they want that? Well, they would know better who to persecute more specifically, and that really was the heart behind all of that. But they did, and it was delivered in October of 1770. Now, this battle would change now to the battle of public opinion. I think I alluded to this a little bit last week. Some of you may remember this. I don't know. This is maybe a month or maybe 2 months ago, where President Trump and Elon Musk started having their battle on social media. They just kept going at each other. Some of you might remember that. It was like 2 children locked in a closet, is what it sounded like. But they were going back and forth on social media. Well, you think, boy, how childish. That must be just one of these new things that people do. Well, this battle became a public battle because it was the same thing, just different. They started publishing articles against each other. The Baptists in really standing their position, and then the government writing, or the standing order churches, whichever may have been the case, one and the same, started writing articles basically mocking the Baptist. And so it became a war then of public opinion, trying to sway people into their thinking. The Boston Evening Post published an article on October 29th that stated the Baptist had complained without any just reason at all. Their complaint had no foundation, in other words. Well, we've already proven that to be otherwise. There was plenty there. So the Baptists then nominated the pastor of Second Baptist Church in Boston to write a rebuttal to this. His name is John Davis. He compiled 10 of the letters that were sent to him, and he wrote his answer in the Massachusetts Gazette on December 27th of that same year. He mainly addressed the issue in Ashfield that we talked about last year, and then he signed the article, A Baptist. A Baptist. And I think that's an awesome way to sign the article, A Baptist. He was very adamant about that. So January 7th of 1771, the next month, the standing order answered, and it was posted in the Boston Evening Post. And it says this, there were several different things. There is a little upstart gentleman lately settled in town who calls himself a Baptist. And the youth discover a most insufferable arrogance and self-sufficiency. I very much suspect that he is one of those deluded young men who are employed to defame and blacken the colonies and his town and province in particular. I am of the same persuasion in religion with this young hero, and I cannot say what the General Assembly could do for the Baptist in general, or that Ashfield brethren in particular, that they have not done. And I believe this is the opinion of the Baptist in general and of all others, but enthusiastic. They are but enthusiastical bigots. So you kind of get the idea of, and there's a whole lot more to it, but there was the back and forth in the things that he was saying. But the one thing that caught me in that quote, I am of the same persuasion in religion with this young hero. No, he was not. We've already established that, I think, very thoroughly. He signed it, a Catholic Baptist. A Catholic Baptist. And again, all of that was just to mock them. So the personal attacks began, and the attacks on the separate Baptist certainly piled up during that day. James Manning, we talked to him last week, stated that the reason the Baptists wouldn't back down, even though they were being imprisoned and their property was stolen, was that they are afraid if they relax the secular arm, their tenets have no merit enough and a sufficient foundation to stand. What is he saying? He says, if you take away any of this secular authority that their churches had, they would have no ground to stand on. In other words, they're liars. What they believe is 100% inaccurate. So since this battle is a battle of words and it's in the press, it caught the ears of many and certainly swayed public opinion. In October, though, interestingly enough, a bomb was dropped on the standing order churches because King George III disannulled the law that took the property from the Baptists in Ashfield. Now remember, those in Ashfield lost pretty much everything that they had, and so now that law is disannulled, is the way that the king dealt with it. So the Massachusetts General Assembly certainly was embarrassed because of this. How do you think they would respond? Would they just sit back with their tails tucked and wish they could have done something different? No. Revenge was in the air, and that's exactly what they would do. There's a couple of examples. There's a man named Chiliad Smith. He was awakened on November 8th of 1771 by an officer from Hampshire County. There was a warrant for his arrest for counterfeiting. So they were just making things up, really, to try and get these people. You'll see that as we go through this. So they come into his house, they wake him up, they come into his house, they ransack his shop, tear everything up, tear up his barns, and they're looking supposedly for the evidence of his counterfeiting. His apple orchard was uprooted and burned, and all of his dry goods were stolen. Does that sound like it has anything to do with counterfeiting? Absolutely not. So you get the idea of what's going on. So surprisingly, or not surprisingly, I should say, no evidence was found of the counterfeiting, but they still arrested him. They still arrested him and took him in. His real crime was that he was a principal member of the Baptist Church in Ashfield, and that came to light later on. When he was in jail, he wrote letters to Isaac Backus, actually wrote his testimony, and it became a published article as well. Another man, Nathan Crosby of Chelmsford Baptist Church, was arrested January 26th of 1773 for refusing to pay the ministerial tax. Same thing that we've seen numerous times. He was in bed sick, and very, very sick as it's described. and his house was broken into by the constables, and they came and they arrested him. He ultimately would pay the tax, but then he sued them to get the money back. Now, this is interesting. The court found that the assessor was wrong and was inaccurate, but the collector was not. And so because the collector was not, he was not going to get any of his money back. So again, they would twist everything and make it so that the Baptist would have no ability to be able to fight. So there's many, many other examples that I'm not going to take the time to address. Again, I mentioned the book last week. There are so many examples in that book of the way that things were in that day. So the Continental Congress now convened September 5th through 26th of 1774. And you know this, I'm sure England's taxes had become way too much for the colonies, and it became a financial struggle for them. But not only that, it was the oppressive mentality of England upon them that they were trying to fight. The Boston Tea Party had already taken place earlier in the year. The Congress was organized or was called together to organize some kind of a response to the tyranny that England was put upon them. In early September, three men that you should be familiar with, John Gano, Hezekiah Smith, and James Manning, gathered in Providence. They discussed the idea of sending a delegation to Philadelphia to this Congress to plead their cause. And as they discussed the idea, they decided they were just going to do everything they could to explain the plight of the Baptist. Isaac Backus was chosen to head up this delegation, and their purpose was to see if something might not be done to obtain and secure our religious liberties beyond what we have yet enjoyed. It was all about religious liberty. And that was their whole principle of everything. We've talked about Isaac Backus many times. That's what he is known for, and he was a fighter for religious liberty, and no doubt became a friend of even George Washington, and I believe designed by God so that religious liberty would be brought to the forefront. So Isaac Backus and another man named William Van Horn made the 2-week trip. Every place that they stopped, they were met with a crowd that wanted them to preach. And so that lengthened the trip just a little bit. Chileab Smith ended up joining them, as well as John Gano and Hezekiah Smith a little bit later. Now, imagine the scene there in Philadelphia. It was bustling when they arrived. It was just a busyness that was there because of the Congress that was convening. Literature was being distributed everywhere for every political cause that anybody possibly could think of. It was being put out. All kinds of patriotism, also all kinds of propaganda was being passed out, and not just in what we would call political, but also in the religious thinking. People were handing out pamphlets basically discrediting infant baptism and things along that lines. So a lot of things were going on. Philadelphia, interestingly enough, they welcomed everybody, and they wanted everybody to come in. It's like they knew that, hey, if we let everybody in, this is going to help our economy. And they let everybody in. They took care of them, and they were a good host town for all of this, very hospitable. But the Baptist men met with several other men who shared their same concerns. The Quakers were among them. Those with political experience had a recommendation, and this was it. Backus wrote this. They advised us not to address the Congress as a body at present, but to seek for a conference with the Massachusetts delegates, together with some other members who were known to be friends to religious liberty. And so they would arrange that, but just know this, the delegates that they were meeting with were from Massachusetts. That ought to tell us something, and you'll see that it does tell us something as we go through this. So they, the Warren Baptist Association, also met with the Philadelphia Baptist Association, and they brought their resources together. And as they did, Backus would read many of the reports of the letters that people had been writing to him. At that time, then, the Philadelphia Baptist Association decided that they were going to put together a grievance committee of their own to be able to address the Congress. On October 14th, the Baptist delegation met with the delegates from Massachusetts to the Congress. They were Thomas Cushing, Samuel Adams, John Adams, and Robert Trent Payne. Backus started the meeting and said, "It may now be asked, what is the liberty desired? The answer is, as the kingdom of Christ is not of this world, and religion is a concern between God and man, with which no human authority can intermeddle, consistently with the principles of Christianity, not being obliged to support a ministry we cannot attend. These we have an undoubted right to as men, as Christians." And that really is a very succinct way of just saying it is true religious liberty that they were looking for. There was some back and forth. James Manning had opportunity to speak during this time, and it was followed by both John and Samuel Adams basically mocking them, saying this, that they had no cause to complain. They also stated that there have been no encroachments upon their religious liberty. Are y'all paying attention? There are no encroachments upon their religious liberty. If you were here last week, you're scratching your head saying, "Excuse me? How could you even say something like that?" And they stated that they had always listened to their complaints. If you say it long enough, maybe it will become true, right? After an hour or two, there was a little bit of pause, and Backus said, "I am sorry to have any accusation to bring against the government I belong to, which I would gladly serve to the utmost of my power, but I must say that facts prove the contrary to their plea." He gave then a short relation, again, of some of the things that happened, the treatment specifically of Ashfield, and they would later write that of the treatment of Ashfield, they were very puzzled. No, they weren't. They were, if not a part of it, at the very least complicit in what was going on. They knew about it. Adams accused them of exaggerating the things, and Payne said, "'Twas only a contention about paying a little money." Interesting. Backus stated, "I cannot give in the certification that they required without implicitly acknowledging that power in man, which I believe belong only to God." Does that sound familiar? I can't get the certificate you're talking about because my authority comes from God. Does that sound familiar? Go all the way back to John Bunyan. You remember how he stated basically the same thing. So in this meeting, after about 4 hours, the men said that they would see what they could do for the Baptists. Isaac Backus concluded the meeting, "Such absurdities does religious tyranny produce in great men." What an awesome quote. It really is an awesome quote. When you mix the religious or the government with everything that they were doing, it just brings out absurdities, even in good men. Even in good men, the four men that were pictured earlier, no doubt part of what he was referring to there. Robert Trent Payne said, after the meeting, Mr. Backus went to Philadelphia in order to prevent the colonies from uniting in defense of the liberties. Again, it's about a smear campaign. And that's really all it is. It's about political posturing. It's not about religious liberty. There was a writer who wrote for several different newspapers. His name was Ezra Stiles. He wrote that the Baptists attacked the delegates and treated them in rude and abusive manner, and that the Baptists pretended they were oppressed. Again, you're getting the idea of the mentality. They only complained of a 4-pence tax. Their complaint had no foundation, and they were treated most scandalously. When we have the power in our hands, we will remember them. Isn't that interesting? So you find several different things here. Newspapers have never been unbiased. So all the way back in that day, this man Ezra Stiles basically mocks them, discredits everything that they say, and says, when we have the power in our hands, we will remember them. That sounds like a threat, doesn't it? And it was. And they would end up acting on on that, and we'll get into some of that next week. But interestingly enough, there's no doubt that the public was swayed because of the things that were just being published, and people would read it, and it's like today, when you find things on the internet, you know that they're true. They would read it in the newspaper, and so it was gold. It was fact as they read it in the newspapers, and so all of the discrediting would certainly have an effect on society. But in spite of all of that, wiser heads could prevail. Two men, both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, sought Isaac Backus's help and advice, both when it came to the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. So it's interesting that although there was all of this smoke, that there's these two men that were able to see through all of that and understand the reality of what was really going on with men like Isaac Backus, and more particularly the Baptist. Okay, we're going to go south now into Virginia. Again, we're going to bring all of this together next week, but we go down now into Virginia. Virginia was probably the hardest place to preach the gospel in the New World about this time, because in Virginia, prison became the expectation of the Baptists. The Baptists just knew that if they just did what they knew they were supposed to do, there was a really good chance they would be in prison. It came to the point where it didn't matter where they preached, it's just that they preached. And it didn't even matter what they preached, it's just that they preached. Carrying the Baptist name became a problem in Virginia. So from 1768 to 1771, 30 Baptist pastors were imprisoned in one county. In Chesterfield County, there were 43 that were imprisoned before the Revolutionary War. So from 68 up through the Revolutionary War. And so prison became, again, as I said, the norm. One of these men, and that's what I want to spend really the rest of our time talking about, was a man named James Ireland. James Ireland, a very unique man that is high on my list, if you will, of American Baptists to look up to. His salvation and baptism is much like those that we've read from up to this time. There was a Baptist preacher named John Pickett who was preaching anywhere that he possibly could. And while preaching, there was an Anglican pastor that got all wound up and frustrated with what he was saying, and he challenged Pickett to a debate with him. And when they would do that, of course, it would be a public thing. It wasn't something just sitting in someone's office. During the debate, Ireland, who was part of the church that was in attendance, realized that the argument that the Baptist was making was scriptural. Isn't that interesting? He put a greater weight on what the Bible says than anything else. And so as he heard this, he became very quickly convinced that the Baptist baptism was the right way, the Baptist doctrine was the right way because of this debate. So it's kind of interesting that this Anglican pastor wanted to end up discouraging and even destroying the work of this Baptist preacher, and ultimately people are getting saved because of it, because their arguments are not scriptural. It's a pretty interesting thing. So Ireland then traveled to Sandy Creek. He wanted to be under Shubal Stearns, and he had a desire to be baptized by Shubal Stearns. Now again, remember, things were different in that day than they are today. You don't have a Baptist church on every corner. You had to find one where you could go and you could be baptized. And so he had heard of Shubal Stearns and the work that was going on there and had desired that. But this was the year that everything kind of exploded with the regulators. And so he was kind of pushed to the side in a sense at that time, but he would later be baptized by Samuel Harris. And if you remember, the year that kind of everything exploded there at Sandy Creek, Samuel Harris was the one that was ordained before all of that took place. And so shortly after his baptism, he began preaching. Again, it was nothing in that day to get saved, and then very shortly after that began preaching. And so he did that. So Ireland, along with two other men, planted Smiths Creek Baptist Church. This was right in the middle of all of the government in the Standing Order churches fighting against the Baptists. He also began traveling and preaching as well as pastoring the church that was there. Like most of them, as we've seen while they were on the road, they would find other Baptists. They would be able to stop at their house, and when they would stop at their house, typically, they would end up preaching. In several of these places that he would go, he would be the same place, and so he would get very familiar with some of these people. While traveling to Culpeper County, he stayed with the Tipton family. Mr. Tipton invited him to stop on his way home, and he said this to him. This was interesting. Ireland replied, "I expect to be in prison in Culpeper jail by then." This kind of tells you a little bit of the mentality of the Baptist pastors in that day. I'm going to preach, and there's a pretty good expectation that I'm going to end up going to jail. So he went through, did all of his preaching, and on his way home, he stopped at the home of a man named Thomas McClanahan to preach, and had a great time preaching, but in the presence was the Anglican pastor, Standing Order pastor in that day, and he greeted him and spoke to him in a very harsh way, of course, after that. And he warned Ireland that if he preached in the home of Mr. Maniffa the next night, that he would certainly be in jail. So that night, Ireland went to bed, and he wrestled with the prospect of going to jail. It's one thing to say it, but then to hear it and to recognize this is really most likely going to be the thing that happens to me tomorrow. So I'm sure you can imagine all of the emotion that he was dealing with. He knew that many other of those in Virginia had done the exact same thing and had the same outcome, and he knew that that's what was going to happen to him. The next day, he goes to Mr. Maniffa's house. Mr. Maniffa says this, "Sir, you may expect to be taken up today if you preach. A certain fine, I am told, will be imposed upon you, and so much upon each individual that will attend your preaching, as well as a fine of 20 pounds on me for granting you my house to preach in." Now that's a pretty heavy statement. That's a pretty heavy statement if you really think about what he's saying. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to be going to prison because I'm going to preach. It's a whole nother thing to recognize that all those in attendance are going to be penalized, and the person that is giving you the place to speak is going to be penalized even more heavily. That would certainly be a weight on somebody, wouldn't you think? It's okay for me to say, okay, I'm going to suffer because of this. It's another thing to say there's others that are going to suffer. But don't be mistaken, what Mr. Maniffa is saying here, it isn't, you might want to reconsider. That is not what Mr. Maniffa is saying. One of the greatest quotes that I think has never even heard the light of day in America is the next thing that he said to him. He squared up his shoulders to Ireland and stood right up to him and said, "Do not flinch your duty." Do not flinch your duty. I've got a note that I have on my desk. Do not flinch your duty. That is such an inspiring statement from this man that says there's going to be suffering. There's going to be a penalty, not only on you, Mr. Ireland, but upon all that are in attendance. But don't be mistaken, we want you to preach. Don't flinch your duty. Well, what do you think he did? Of course, he preached, but he got a little bit creative with the way that he preached. A large crowd gathered, and Ireland had some men take a table and drag this table, wooden table, all the way to the edge of the property of Mr. Maniffa. And so it was on the property line. They're way out in the woods now. They're not at his house. They're not in his house. They're nowhere really near his house at this point. And so Ireland was on the property line, stood on that table, and just flung her down. and just preached and preached and preached. It stated, and this was nothing uncommon in that day, that he would preach for almost 2 hours, and the people no doubt soaked up everything that was being preached on that day. And so he did what he did not flinch his duty. He did what he should have done. As he concluded, they could hear the rustling and voices in the woods. They knew exactly who it was. It was the government, the church, that was coming. They yanked him down by the neck and they chained him. And they asked this question: who gave you the authority? You know, I've thought about that, and I read this several times. I don't know that there is a better question that they could have asked. You know, they expected something totally different. Whose authority are you preaching under? Best question that they could have asked him. He replied, "He that was the author of the gospel has a right to send forth whom he has qualified to dispense it." Isn't that awesome? It has nothing to do with your stinking government. It has nothing to do with your church. It has everything to do with our Savior, who gave me the right and the privilege to dispense of the gospel, as he would say. Then something that happened that we haven't seen much before. There in the woods, this crowd decided they were going to fight. And so they started fighting. They started trying to get him away from them. And this is one of those awesome examples in early America of we the people sharing their voice and really fighting for something that they knew to be the right thing to be fighting for. And they just simply questioned, how could somebody be jailed simply for preaching the gospel? How could someone be jailed simply for preaching the gospel? Well, now we move to the scene in prison. We find Ireland in the Culpeper jail. The hearing that he was given, as could be expected, was a farce. He had no opportunity to be able to say anything. It was basically, here's the accusation, here's the penalty for the crime, now go to jail. And so he went to the Culpeper jail. In Culpeper County that night became a celebration. They were throwing rocks and sticks and anything that they could find through the window in his cell. Insults and vulgarity were shouted at him the whole night long. And the first night he started questioning this. And this is his own testimony. Am I really right? Am I really right? Now, does that make him weak? Well, when I was thinking about that, I thought about John the Baptist while he was in prison. And he sent messengers to Jesus. Are you him, or do we look for another? I kind of feel like James Ireland was facing that same kind of dilemma in his own life. Am I actually right? And so he laid there in his cell, and in the next morning, he opened up his Bible and he turned to Acts chapter 26 in verse number 16. But rise and stand upon thy feet, for I have appeared unto thee for this purpose, to make thee a minister and a witness both of these things which thou hast seen, and of those things in the which I will appear unto thee. Stand up on thy feet. This is what I've called you to. What an awesome thing. It's just a side note here. The Word of God is so awesome. God, and I don't know how many times that I am just looking, and I'll probably mention something along this line in the morning service. I just need that encouragement. I just need that help. And sometimes, honestly, I don't even realize the help that I need. And I'm able to open up my Bible, and it's like the Lord just puts the right passage right in front of my eyes, and it speaks volumes to me. And I picture Ireland as he's sitting in that jail, and he hears that, or he reads that. And what a great moving, no doubt, that was for him. So then, that next day, he decided, well, the worst thing that they could do for me is throw me in prison for preaching, so I might as well preach from prison. It makes perfect sense. And so he started preaching through the Iron Gate. While he was preaching, the crowds would gather. The opposition would run through there with their horses trampling the crowd. Some of them were beaten just for standing there and just for listening, but the people kept coming back. Every day he would go and he would preach, and the people kept coming back. So in the Culpeper prison, the conditions were deplorable. Mice and spiders were pretty much to be expected all day, every day. There was at least one attempt to kill him by poisoning while he was there. And what was against the law, people were charged to come and visit him. If you wanted to go see him, Ireland, while he was in prison, you were going to have to pay to do so. But yet his attitude was unchanged about what he was supposed to do. And he started signing every letter that he wrote, "From my palace in Culpeper." After a while, there was a large Irish drunk man that was put into his cell for the purpose, and this is recorded, for the purpose to scare him, to put fear in him. But through kindness to him, Ireland was able to ultimately gain a friend. And over time, he was ultimately able to lead him to the Lord. So not only was he then a friend, he was also a brother at that time. Ireland's enemies had become more and more fierce. They started reaching in to his prison cell and yanking him against the grates, pulling on him, choking him, trying to kill him. And many times that Irish man before would just look back and he would laugh at what was going on. But now this Irish man is a friend, and he is also a fellow believer that he finally just had enough. And he started reaching out and grabbing them by the hair and pulling them up against the grates and scaring them. Every preacher needs a good big Irish man, amen? Not surprisingly, the assaults stopped because the man that was in the cell with him. So for Ireland, the bond was paid and he was released in March of 1770. A hearing was scheduled. He and two other men brought a petition to the governor of Virginia. They wanted permission to build a meeting house to preach the gospel freely. That's all they wanted. That's all they wanted, was the right to be able to build this building. So the court came up with their idea, and they said, okay, we will agree to this if you will get the signature of an Anglican minister. Well, here's where God starts changing hearts. This man had heard some of the debates and was wavering in his belief, and he signed this. He said, so they got the signature from the one Anglican minister to be able to build their Baptist meeting house. So he took this ammunition then to the Culpeper court for his second trial, to be able to wipe out all of the charges that were put against him. It was presented by his lawyer, and his lawyer had also pointed out that the very laws that they had thrown him in prison for had expired 5 years ago. So he had a really good lawyer that did his homework and all of these things. And interestingly enough, he had a very good lawyer. And as he presented just the facts, he wasn't twisting anything. He was presenting all of the facts. All of the accusers started slowly leaving. Kind of reminds us of another Bible story about Jesus reaching down and writing in the sand, and all of a sudden the truth is being told, that they started leaving, and ultimately there were no accusers even left in the courtroom after all of that was said and done. I believe again this was an act of God, because these men's hearts were so hard, but yet they fled at this point until there were no accusers left. His petition was granted. Liberty started now for the Baptists in Virginia. Remember Virginia, because next week we're going to see a conversation that I believe wholeheartedly, if the conversation did not take place, that there is a really good chance that we would not have had the First Amendment. And you'll see that next week. Let's pray. Lord, again, we're thankful that we can learn from history, thankful for men that stood up, thankful for your word, Lord, how you influenced them and still today to be able to just stand on things that are right. And I pray that you would help us to use this in our lives to stand against the things that are happening in our world. Pray that you continue to meet with us and help us today, we ask in Christ's name. Amen.